course, you plan for this and then never fails. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Elena Perales, and I am the director for St. Joseph Justice Center for the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. On behalf of the CSJ Center for Reconciliation and Justice, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to the Intersectionality of Migration, Racism, and Climate Crisis session. One of the many sessions offered in this year's symposium, The Faces of Justice, Listening, Discovering, Transforming. Today, we have an opportunity in the session to answer Pope Francis' call to us to integrate questions of justice in discussions of environment. In addition, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange joined the leadership of Conference Women Religious in affirming the interrelatedness of justice concerns addressed in a resolution issued in 2015. And I quote, "We are broken by the countless ways our human family and earth are coming home, suffer from disconnection, indifference, violence, and fear in the face of racism, migration, and climate crisis. We recommit ourselves to create communion and examine root causes of injustice. We recognize a sense of urgency and pledge prayer, education, and advocacy." End of quote. It is with this commitment that I share the objective for this session, which is to learn from local and international leaders who work and minister with our marginalized brothers and sisters on the climate crisis, on how climate crisis impacts migration. Today, we will learn of migration from South, Central America, and South Mexico. We will hear about peace-building strategies in places of high levels of violence in Mexico, which impact migration. We will also learn how local communities of color, specifically in Los Angeles and nearby Long Beach, are impacted by environmental justice and how it is connected to racism. Therefore, we will witness why U.S. Catholic bishops call for people to have the right to migrate, and for countries, of course, to have the right to regulate their borders. But it must be done with fairness and compassion. I now have the honor to introduce our presenters. First, we have Laura J. Cortez, Co-Executive Director for East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice. Laura, ella, is a lifelong Bell Gardens resident. She received a bachelor's degree in Spanish from CSU, Los Angeles, and her master's arts degree in sociology with an emphasis in community development from CSU Long Beach. She has been Spanish and English interpreter since 2010, including interpreting for domestic violence victims, health, and immigration organizations. Laura's focus is to work towards equity that improves the lives of Black, Indigenous, and people of color neighborhoods through community-led leadership for current and future generations. Then we have Cecilia Suarez, who has a special connection to the Sisters of St. Joseph, as she is a former student of the Sisters of St. Joseph School of Mexico City, Colegio Francés del Pedregal, and she embraces their belief to Christ, always faithful. Cecilia heads Catholic Relief Services Office in Mexico since 2013. This office supports the efforts of Catholic Church through the National Caritas social pastoral teams in different dioceses, implementing peace-building strategies in places with high levels of violence. In addition, her office promotes capacity-building strategies for its church partners to manage disaster risk reduction programs in vulnerable communities. Cecilia studied food chemistry in the National Autonomous University of Mexico and has a degree in nonprofit administration. She currently lives in Mexico City with her family. We have Sister Dolores Valencia, a Mexican sister of St. Joseph from a congregation of St. Joseph of Leon. She also has a special place in our hearts, as she is one of our many congregations that are connected to the Sisters of St. Joseph. She's a woman religious for 50 years. She's a former primary school teacher with a master's degree in theology from St. Ignatius Spiritual Accompaniment. Over the years, she has worked in urban, rural, indigenous, and human mobility pastoral councils. As part of her congregational services, she served as general counselor and province director for Mexico, Honduras, and El Paso, Texas. Sister Dolores is founder and current director of a migrant shelter, Albergue de Canal Guadalupano, providing humanitarian support for migrants in transit since 2010 in the state of Veracruz, Mexico. And then we have Doug Ryan, a veteran Catholic Relief Services staffer serving as a country representative and sub-regional director for Catholic Relief Services in Latin America, Southeast Asia, East Africa, and the Middle East. He has made contributions in diverse areas, including human rights in Guatemala, emergency response and potable water programming in Honduras, and peace building in Manadao in South Sudan. He led refugee assistance programs throughout the Middle East, and in his current role, he represents Catholic Relief Services in the major contributions in California and Arizona, matching their passions with effective, transforming humanitarian development work. He currently resides in San Diego area with his family. So now there you have it. We have wonderful presenters today that will enlighten us and share their experience and their very powerful testimony. So now why don't we just move to the next segment and ask Laura to present. Take it away, Laura.
Thank you so much, Maria Elena. Thank you to everybody who is joining today. As I go through this presentation, please feel free to ask questions in the chat and then we can come back to them later. I'm excited to be with my co-presenters. I'll start with just sharing a little bit about where I am because we are in a large spectrum of where folks are. I live in a smaller city called Bell Gardens, which is in Southeast Los Angeles, here in California, in the US, which is colonized Tongva land. And so I'll actually go a little bit into the presentation here that I made. Beautiful. Go present here. So I've lived here my whole life, coming from Mexicali, which is where my family's from, and migrated from, right? So when we talk about climate, when we talk about racism, when we talk about migration, this is so important and pivotal to the work that we do. And it's also at the center of a lot of our own personal stories. If you're joining today, or if you're part of the panel, right, that's exactly a lot of what our stories come from. And I do apologize, it says it's loading. Maria Elena, does it say it's loading on your end as well? Or can you see it? It says it's loading. Okay, that's weird. Let me try that one more time. I'm so sorry, y'all. 1 second. Technical difficulties as always. Oh, it's showing on my screen. A ver, let's try this one more time. One more time. A ver si ahora sí. Ah, there we go. Do you see it, man? Perfect, thank you. So I do live on Tongva land here in East Yard, in the East Yard community, which I'll go into later, but myself and my home, and we are on native land, right? We need to always remember whatever land that we are on, that there are original stewards to this land that are still present, that are still fighting, right, for this land, that are still fighting to take care of this land, right? And that for me as a visitor and guest in Tongva land, right, and forming a life here, that it's very important for me to be responsible to that. And so definitely encourage folks to look up, right, if you don't already know what land you're from, because I think that's really important, particularly in this conversation that we're having here today. also just want to acknowledge that we are in a political climate. So I'm so excited that so many folks showed up today, despite the fact that we're in the middle of a huge political transition in the US. And to be honest, political transitions everywhere in every country that are definitely impacting, right, these three topics that we're here to talk about today. And also that we're in a pandemic, right? We are still in international global pandemic that has huge significant impacts, particularly on race, and does impact folks who are already impacted by the climate and pollution crisis. So just wanted to make those acknowledgements as we get started. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about who is East Yard, because I can't really, the story of climate racism, particularly that of climate, started for me at East Yard. East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice is named after a rail yard, of all things, a rail yard facility that is called the East Yard in the small city of Commerce, California. And the City of Commerce, California brings in a lot, has intermodal facilities or rail yards that bring in a lot of pollution, a lot of truck traffic, trains that come from the ports. And before all of that, there were Japanese gardens. Before all of that, there was a community that lived, right? So there was indigenous folks in this community, as I stated earlier. And then colonizers came and invaded, right? As many of us know. And then we had to create, or capitalism was then created, right? And so from there, we had Japanese community in these areas. And so we did have Japanese gardens and homes and families here. And then World War II happened and the internment happened. And so those lands were then taken and reappropriated into what is now these rail facilities, what is now a lot of these areas where the freeways are, where our homes are, right? And so I say all of that because when we talk about pollution, right, when we're talking about where this story starts around migration, who's migrating, where to, for what purpose, and what is the outcome of that, all of it is relevant to how we are displaced and disposable, right? In many of these cases, right? And we see that in this transition and even in our community, even in terms of how we are called East Yard and what we are battling with now. And so East Yard now is a community organization that supports the areas of the East Side, what we know as East LA and Boyle Heights, Southeast LA, which is about 10 or 12 cities, down the 710 corridor, which I will talk about later, and the Long Beach area, which is where we'll find our ports of LA, and which is where also a lot of ship, vehicular traffic and goods movement comes from. And when East Yard started, we started because based on three questions. We started with community members in the area who are predominantly what we would identify as Latino communities here now. And really a community foundation that was already established and started joining together because they realized that they were having significant health issues as the rail yard started developing. And started realizing that this had significant impacts to our health, including death, including cancer, and many other things, as you all can imagine. And some of y'all may be in these situations or communities or in your own community experiencing the same. And so we gathered around these three questions. What is it? How does it affect us? And what can we do about it? And those continue to be the three questions that guide our work today. And so we started with the rail yard, right? Identifying that as an issue. And that's really important and significant because what we'll find is with many sources of pollution, with many sources that lead to health impacts as well as a climate crisis, they are disproportionately located in communities of color, or communities of color are there because that is the only place that is attainable to us, right? And these are the places that cause significant health concerns. And here on the right, just you'll see some of us, of our Eastern members doing a demonstration with some banners. That's in Long Beach area. And we have a couple of signs, and they might be small on your screen, but one of them says hashtag zero emissions now. And the other one is hashtag we are just trying to breathe, which are two things we stand really importantly by, right? Because the basic rights, right? When we talk about rights, of being able to breathe, of being able to live, of being able to thrive is something that is very difficult for us. And it's something that, even though it should be a right, we're constantly fighting for and towards. And so I also want to mention, right, our organization is called Environmental Justice. But what is environmental justice is very intersectional, right? And so I want to make that kind of a community agreement for us here, right? That when I'm talking about environmental justice and the work that we do, we are talking about multiple layers of work. We don't just do traffic, right? And reduction of emissions, which is very important, but we also focus on our water and our soil, as well as our air. We also focus on white supremacy, because that is huge internationally to why migration exists, right, is white supremacy. We also focus on housing, right, because our lack of homes is a significant impact, right, of one, why we're migrating, and two, a significant issue even here in the area of LA, particularly right now during COVID, right? It is a continuous issue and takes different ways, and we can talk about that in a bit. Capitalism, right, which is very much tied into white supremacy, right? The idea that if you don't have money, that you're not worthy, the idea that your job has a certain amount of worth, right? So which goes into labor, right? So all of these things are all environmental justice, and all of these things impact migration, are impacted by race, right? And ultimately impact our climate and pollution, as well as globalization, which is how this panel is actually framed today, which is beautiful. And then policy and policing. So that's just a little bit of that. And so how, just to give you all a framework around how at East Yard we challenge some of this framework and continue to build, right? Because despite the fact that we are impacted by these things, we have multi-generational membership. We have multi-generational community members standing by each other, sharing knowledge and standing up, as you saw in that first image. And so this is actually an image of some of our community members just having a small conversation. Some of them are youth members, some of them are older, right? And so really what we try to do, and I made this as a line, but it's actually very cyclical. And there is no one starting point. People start at different areas. But the way that we frame understanding these ideas and challenging these ideas is through leadership, right? A lot of folks do not want to be leaders. A lot of folks don't know how to be leaders, right? But leadership is very easy because there is no one way to do that. And so we definitely give folks the understanding and knowledge, which is what a lot of folks are doing in this panel today, to be able to then be leaders in their community, with their families, with their friends, right? To be leaders on these topics, whatever topic is of your passion, right? And then we build community, right? Through that, we're able to rely on each other. And I'll give a quick example, right? Folks on my Instagram may not know exactly what I do, right? When I post about environmental justice, they just say, oh, she's helping the community. And they may not know that, right? But today I had someone on Instagram contact me, a friend from high school who is not engaged in our work, and said, you know, I have a slumlord, and they're trying to charge me or trying to kick me out of my home and displace me. Right. And so they know that they can come to me, and that I'm connected to it, that I may not be the expert, but I am connected to a network that can connect them to support. Right. And so ultimately that is building communities that we can support each other, through these things, right? And so fighting projects, that's one thing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but there's two ways when we're challenging things. There are two different ways that we do this. And one is by challenging an individual project, and the other is by changing the entire system that it exists in. And one doesn't come before the other. They always work together, right? We have to work on both fronts because there is an urgency when you're fighting one project. And I'll give you an example of a project in a minute. And then there's also, but fighting project by project is not sustainable, right? And so fighting the system, right, or challenging the system and changing that is also so imperative. So both definitely have a place that's necessary. And so from there, we also have, right, and so I just kind of talked about fighting systems, kind of got ahead of myself, and self-sustainability, right? So the other idea, one, is that many of us internationally, right, live with policies that we had no hand in passing, that we had no say in being able to create, right? And so what that looks like for us is, how do we create our own solutions? Our own solutions where we're relying on ourselves and our immediate community to solve some of these problems, where we don't have to depend on whatever the politica is, how it changes, right? And how are we an autonomous group, right? And you can see many examples of that politically if you read through history. But I just wanted to frame that really quickly. And that's one of our bike programs that we have as well. So I just wanted to highlight some of our programs and people. So you're not just looking at me and the other panelists the entire time. Y'all can look at these pictures as well. And so now I'm going to show you this map. You may or may not know about it. This is called the Cal Enviro Screen. And the Cal Enviro Screen is an interesting tool that can be used by community. It started as environmental justice EJSM project to be able to understand what are the cumulative impacts in communities. Okay, and cumulative impacts means that you're just going back. Sorry, I'm just going to go back. Going back to this slide, right? We're not just impacted by air quality. We're not just impacted by housing. We're not just impacted by water, right? We're impacted by a group of these things. We're impacted by language justice, right? Particularly here in the US, right? Where a lot of our elders or folks that are just migrating don't know English, right? And are expected to know it, right? So all of these things combine poverty, right? And unemployment. So all of these things are in here. I will note, one of the things that's not included in this map is race, which is very interesting. But the rest of the things I mentioned are, and some of the things that are included in the colors of this map, and I'll go over the colors in a second. But some of the things that are included are pollution burden, such as water pollution, air pollution, traffic. It includes health indicators, such as asthma, cardiovascular disease, and low birth weight. It also includes socioeconomic indicators, such as language, education level, poverty, and unemployment, right? And so when folks migrate or have migrated, particularly, right, my family migrated from Mexico, as I mentioned earlier, originally from Zacatecas to Mexicali and then to Los Angeles. And so when they migrate, you migrate, right? Because of these community connections, everything that I just relayed is not new, right? People come because of community and they say, there's a better chance, there's some more income, right? Also, this is very historical, right? Why is there more work here? Why is there more income here? Because white supremacy has colonized these Latin American countries, right? And these South American countries. And so all of this all comes full circle. But in my little pocket of the world here in Los Angeles, as I learned about it, this is my neighborhood. Actually, this little black dot is where I live. So that's my home. And so thinking of all these colors, as you see red, You can imagine red is typically framed as bad. So if you are red, then you have more unemployment, more poverty, more asthma, higher asthma rates, more air pollution, more traffic, right? That's what the red means. If you get orange, it's a little less bad, yellow, a little less bad, and green means that it's really nice. This is a nice area to live. This is where there is employment, wealth, um, good water quality, air quality, things like that, right? And so this is my neighborhood. And this is also, even though race is not included in here, so you'll just have to take my word for it, but all of these cities are BIPOC cities, right? Which we call Black, Indigenous, people of color cities. And so here I live in Bell Gardens, as you can see, and I mentioned, right, I am from Mexico, from an immigrant family. Here's Linwood, Compton, right, and East LA up here, which we know a lot of these are actually very, very impacted, are very much migrant communities, right? But we also now know, right, by using this tool, that these are also the same communities that are impacted by traffic, that are impacted by air pollution, right, that have higher incidence of cardiovascular disease, right? How many of our family members, right, are have high blood pressure? I have high blood pressure. Why do I have high blood pressure, right? How many of our families know someone who's had a stroke, right? Or has any type of heart disease, or has asthma, right? Asthma is being such a normalized incident, but it's really not, right? And a lot of it is produced by traffic. So just some things to keep in mind. And I also want to know this little gray box, which some of you that are mapping nerds may have said, why is there a gray box? Why doesn't that have any of the colors mentioned? And the reason for that is because this specific area is the city of Vernon. The city of Vernon is a city that has a very low population. It has 100 or 200 residents. But it is highly industrial, which is very interesting because because it doesn't have a color, but all around it, all you see is red, right? All you see is red because even though there's a low population density there, there's a huge amount of industry that causes pollution and climate issues in that area, right? So, and here you'll see some of these, right? No surprise that a lot of these areas that are green are attributed to wealth, right? The city of Lakewood, Palos Verdes, and some of these areas on the east side. And so, there you go. Okay, and so I kind of wanted to share with you a little bit of a case study. At East Yard, we work on many projects, but I wanted to kind of bring back the community aspect around when we're migrating into these areas that are severely impacted. What happens in these communities, right? Why are they red, right? And so here, I wanted to just talk a little bit about a proposed widening, right? So in 2001, 2002, when the organization started, there was a proposed widening of the 710 freeway. The 710 freeway, if you're not from this area, you may not know, but if you are, you know that it's heavily trafficked freeway. And it starts at the port areas in Long Beach, and it ends over by like Alhambra, right? And this is used by the ports for trucks to go and come up and down the 710, and they're either going to the City of Commerce, where the biggest rail yards are, or they're taking the 60 or 91 freeways to get to the inland valleys, where there are other migrant communities of color, right? And there's huge warehousing there, right? And so up in this area, these are all actually the communities that we serve. It's East LA, Commerce, Maywood, Bell, Cudahy, Bell Garden. So you'll see the cities that we work with are usually going up and down this corridor. And so when this project was proposed in 2001, 2002, the goals of Caltrans, which is the Department for Transportation in California, specifically in our district, which is District 7, and Metro, which is also in charge of transportation. So these two huge transportation agencies proposed this widening. They did. I wish I could see all of you to ask, why do you think that this widening that was proposed, right? But as I can't, then I'll answer my own question. The widening was proposed to make way for what they projected would be significant increases to truck traffic. Right? So Caltrans and Metro knew that they would be moving more goods, right? More things through these ports. These ports already see 40% of all goods that come into the US, right? And so through this community, and so it passes through these communities. So all of these goods, all of these things that come by, they come through our neighborhoods, but they don't necessarily come to our neighborhoods, if that makes sense, right? That means that even though we have billions of dollars worth of things, our communities that are living next to it and are suffering the impacts of this are not seeing any of the benefits, right? They still live in poverty. Our communities still have high unemployment rates, right? And high asthma rates to go with it. And they don't pay for that, right? Companies don't pay for that. These transportation agencies don't pay for that, right? But their goal was to widen for this purpose. And so East Yard, along with other partner organizations, created a coalition called the Coalition for Environmental Health and Justice. And so it's a group of us. And so we are still in this fight. What is it now? 19 years later, 20 years later this year. And we have been able to push for goals to include the public health, right? To include benefits to the community. Right. And I say that because when we talked earlier, I mentioned we need to fight project by project, but also policies that are macro, right? So we do fight for that. This is one project, but ultimately, because this is a project that would impact the entire US, it's really important, right, that this sets a precedent for other projects in the future, whether it's here or in Chicago or Florida, wherever, right? And so we have to ask the questions, who lives in these communities, which I already kind of explained, right? Who sets the goals for this project, which is something that Caltrans and Metro did without consulting community. But once community forced our way into this process, we were forced to be heard. What were the benefits from this project, right? To them, it was traffic reduction, or like allowing for more traffic to pass. For us, it is much more than that, right? It is not only not increasing the air pollution, but it's a reduction in air pollution, right? And seeing air quality improvements. And then who makes these decisions, right? And I mentioned Caltrans and Metro, right? Two huge entities that did not plan to bring us to the table in this process until we first forced our way into these processes. So I'm just gonna show a little clip, and it'll only be about 30 seconds to a minute, of an action that some of our youth members organized, because it's really powerful to understand that our elders carry so much knowledge because they migrated to this country, right? It was them that made this very difficult decision with the knowledge that they had to try to make a better life for future generations, right? And that's really important and has to be really taken as a priority in our movement, right? And in our work. But then youth also have very innovative solutions. And so it's this bringing together that is one of the most difficult things to do, to make something intergenerational, but one of the most beautiful things to do. And so I'll share here a little piece of this video. Oh no, I want to play it. Oh, there you go. Okay.
Research proves that expanding the freeway does not reduce traffic. If anything, it increases it. This expansion project does not meet its promised goals of improving air quality, mobility, congestion, and accessing green technologies.
Caltrans and the Metro boards have continued to prioritize industries over community member lives.
It does not increase safety on the freeway. It does not include zero emission. It displaces residents and businesses and does not include a targeted policy. It is ridiculous that after 16 years of wasting public time and research, the best plan Metro could put forth is one that continues congestion and reduces houses and resources in the already impacted communities.
But if you
Let me stop that there. Okay. Sorry, I'm waiting for this to come back really quickly. Okay, there we go. Okay. So that's just so you don't hear me talking for all this time, but also so that you can get a sense, right, of what community coming together looks like. Because at the end of the day, it is community building, especially, right, when we're talking about migration and climate crisis, which we are all impacted by in communities of color. It's really important to understand that creating those community ties is what's going to bring us together, right? And so, right, viewing migration as power, right here I have one of our very young youth members who's in middle school, but it is her grandmother is involved with East Yard, right? Her mother is involved with East Yard, right? And they are all understanding, right here she's holding a sign that says Exide is poison, right? And so understanding that our land is beautiful and precious, even if we've migrated, especially where we are now, right? And so at the power of migrants and indigenous communities to address climate change via community solutions. And that protest is also the language that we're going to use when we're not heard, right? And so this is specifically a protest that we did and an action a couple months ago during COVID, right? COVID is not somewhere where you should be out and about, right? But when our communities and our lives are on the line and the agencies that are meant to protect us are not, right? We need to find alternative solutions in community building. And so I wanted to share that image. And then, but also it doesn't always look like a protest, right? Community building and shifting. On the right, you see a picture of La Cosecha Colectiva, which is our decentralized gardening program. We don't have the ability or money, right, to be able to create a community garden, right, or buy land. We don't own land, but we are able to use what we have, right? Whether that's raised garden beds, right? Or here on the land of one of our members in Linwood and her home. And we do it like a community, right? It is community members that get together and plant, right? To support climate, right? To support our own well-being, right? I'm not gonna get into it because we don't have time, but we're also in a food apartheid where we live. We don't have produce, and when we do have, we have a lot of food insecurity. And where we do have food, a lot of times it is rotting on the shelf, right? It's not good quality produce, and that's specifically in our communities, right? We don't have Vons or Albertsons or Sprouts, right, that have good quality produce, right? We have El Super and Fuforles, right? That's what we have. And so when we grow our own food and can share that, that is also community building. And that's also an act of resistance. So I just wanted to briefly highlight that as addressing, right, one, ancestral knowledge around growing food, right? Because it is our ancestors that teach us that, particularly those that come from Mexico, Centro America, Sudamerica. But also, right, teaching future generations to do the same. And so I'll pretty much end with that. This is a picture from one of our meetings, right? We have meetings every month, every 2 weeks now virtually, but when we were meeting in person, it's just really beautiful to share space to eat together, to talk about these things, right? Without fear, right? And feeling safe. And that's honestly a space that not all of us have, but that we all want to cultivate. And I hope that we're all here to do as well. If you have more info generally about East Yard, our info is there. And so is mine. But I definitely want to pass it off and hear from our other speakers. So thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Laura. That was very informative. And there is a couple of questions. We'll hold questions to the end because we want to be able to give a chance to other speakers. This is very informative. I live in the area in LA in Pico Rivera, which is red. I saw it as red. And I'm also an immigrant, so I definitely can see the relationship. Thanks for sharing. Quite an eye opener for myself as well. So we now have Cecilia Suarez and la hermana Dolores Plasencia. They will present together about what's la hermana is witnessing in her shelter, and Cecilia will tell you what her work is and what it involves and what her goals are. And it will be a powerful testimony. So thank you so much, and take it away, Cecilia and Sister Hermana, Sister Dolores.
Thank you, Maria Elena. Hi, very nice to be with all of you this afternoon. Well, I'm going to share a little bit how is the context of in our region recently. And I want to start sharing that I believe that Latin America and the Caribbean region are experiencing what I call the causes and consequences of multiple pandemics. So I think we have, for the last 10 years, an increase in violence performed by gangs, maras, and organized crime, but also the consequences of repression of some of states like the case of Nicaragua and Venezuela. And adding to that, we have the COVID-19 quarantines that have increased gender violence and domestic violence. And the already affected regional economy that has been now badly affected by the pandemic during COVID, increasing the cost of living. And one of the other, wait a second, oh yeah. So, talking about climate change as well, producers and small producers, and now in recent year we were hit by tropical storms and hurricanes that have people cross these challenges. Well, the climate change really has a big affection in all these communities, Central America and Mexico as well. And the last multiple natural disasters that impacted Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and southern Mexico have caused the loss of millions of homes. The crops of the second harvest of the year were destroyed. Landslides buried entire communities under the mud and causing the loss of many lives, homes, and livelihoods. Hundreds of communities are still living in temporary shelters due to the lack of efficiency of governments to prevent and respond to disasters. Hurricane Iota and Eta left 5 million people, 1.5 are children, without a place to live and without access to their land. All the people who were affected by these disasters will hardly find the courage to see a promising future and will see only the option of moving to find other places where they can survive. CRS in Guatemala recently did a study about rooting factors, and they wanted to understand what were the main factors that affected the decision to migrate or to stay in their communities. And what we found is that the main reason that people make the people to decide to go is when they lost the hope of having possibilities to make social changes in their communities. And in the opposite side, the main factor that help people to stay in their homes and not to migrate is actually when they see a possibility for a social change based on communitarian support, solidarity groups, and neighborhoods that works together to solve their problems. So what else we are seeing in the recent migration context? The last 4 years, the northern border of Mexico, with the implementation of the Migration Protection Protocol, MPP, also known as the Remain in Mexico program, received more than 77,000 people that remain stuck in our border cities, as well as the reform made to the Title 42 as a preventive measure for the pandemic, has expelled only into Tijuana more than 35,000 people. The Catholic Church has a network of 130 shelters along Mexico. Half of these shelters have closed during the pandemic or are operating at half of the capacity, leaving a larger population exposed to exploitation, abuse, violence, and facing criminal networks of kidnappers, extortionists, and traffickers. As the news sadly reported a week ago about the massacre of 19 people, many of them presumed from Guatemala. Since the beginning of the pandemic, migrants have been forced to move around the country in search of work and opportunities to find places to stay safe. Lately, internal flows of people in Mexico have increased as migrants are trying to return to the northern border with the hope that courts will reopen and their asylum applications will restart again. So the cities in the northern border are once again overwhelmed and crowded. What is CRS doing? Well, we are working together, the Guatemala office and the Mexico office, with 32 shelters that provide humanitarian support to migrants from the border of Guatemala with Honduras up to Tijuana in Baja California. And what we are trying to do is to improve their capacities to respond to a humanitarian emergency, helping shelters to distribute their spaces, to maintain social distancing, to increase the hygiene and sanitation training of migrants and the teams that are working in the shelters, as well as to learn how to protect vulnerable migrants, referring them to services such as clinics and hospitals to receive medical attention. And we are supporting as well migrant shelters, some of them, to increase their capacity for fundraising as the COVID has affected their economy, and some of them are closing their doors because they don't have any more support of their communities. So with this, I will want to let Sister Dolores share her experience because she's working really at the face of the problem in the shelter that she runs.
Gracias, Cecilia. Creo que tú describiste las razones por las que muchas personas dejan sus casas. Para mí la experiencia cotidiana es ver llegar a esas mujeres, a esos niños y a esos hombres que han perdido la esperanza y la alegría, que han perdido la posibilidad de pensar que en sus tierras, en sus países, en el lugar donde nacieron, van a poder desarrollar una vida digna.
Thank you, Cecilia. I think you've described the reasons very well. My job every day is to work with men and women like the ones that you've described who have lost hope and try to provide for them a sense of the future.
Yo estoy en un albergue que se encuentra en Veracruz, en el sur de Veracruz, y que recibe todos los días el paso del tren que se llama desgraciadamente en México la bestia, porque ha destruido a muchos migrantes en el camino. Y en este
I manage a shelter in the south of Veracruz, right at the point where the train infamously called the Beast comes through. We call it the Beast because it's destroyed so many lives.
En ese tren, por ejemplo, el día de hoy venían cerca de 400 migrantes, de ellos pudimos asistir con alimentos a 220 más o menos, 225, y hemos tratado de estar ayudándoles a que pasen a bañarse, a lavarse, etcétera. Pero lo que más tratamos también es de escucharlos, de hacerles sentir que como personas humanas ellos son importantes para alguien. Ellos vienen con esa sensación de frustración y de dolor.
Just today, we attended to 400 people. We were able to feed about 220 of them and provide facilities for showers and for cleaning up and that kind of thing for almost all of them.
Las condiciones del COVID y de la pandemia no nos permiten ahora recibirlos para que se queden a dormir y descansen. Y esto es una gran limitación.
Unfortunately, COVID doesn't allow us to take them in and provide them a place to sleep. This is a huge limitation we're facing.
Porque ellos están teniendo que caminar entre 18 y 20 días para poder subirse al tren desde la frontera sur de México. Encuentran el tren después de 18 o 20 días de caminar.
People are walking 18 to 20 miles just to get to the train that eventually gets them to where the shelter is in the south of Veracruz.
Y al subirse al tren en Coatzacoalcos, que es la ciudad anterior, tienen que viajar por lo menos 12 horas arriba del tren, que es un tren de carga, para poder llegar hasta el albergue donde nosotros estamos.
They travel on this freight train on the roof. They're not in the train, seated or anything. They travel on the roof of the train from where they pick it up to Veracruz.
Cuando ellos llegan al albergue, lo primero es darles una bienvenida, hacerles sentir que nos alegramos de que ellos hayan podido llegar y de que podemos recibirlos, acogerlos, tratar de brindarles algún tipo de protección y de ayuda. Y los invitamos siempre a agradecer la vida, desde sus propias creencias y desde su manera de vivir su fe o su religión, que ellos puedan bendecir el que estamos juntos y que tenemos vida todos.
First thing we do when they arrive is that we welcome them. We make them feel as if they're welcome, they're invited. We pray with them. We ask them that in spite of everything, they give thanks to life and thanks for the opportunity to live and to continue on.
Y esta situación de pandemia pues nos ha llevado a exigir muchas más medidas sanitarias que para ellos son sumamente difíciles, pero que son indispensables para poder atenderlos y para tratar de detener esta pandemia.
We have really fought to have the kinds of hygiene facilities people need, especially in light of COVID. It's a very, very important element.
La pandemia también nos ha dejado en el albergue sin voluntarios, porque la mayor parte de nuestro voluntariado local que venía de las parroquias para apoyarnos, pues ha tenido que alejarse por causa del COVID y de la pandemia.
COVID has led to a loss of many of our volunteers who aren't able to congregate with us for mainly because of the pandemic.
Además de todos los peligros que pasan en el camino porque son continuamente asaltados, robados, maltratados, además del cansancio y la fatiga, viene toda esa carga emocional de haber dejado su patria, sus familias y de no tener nada en vista para el futuro.
In addition to the physical strain that we see in people arriving, many of them have been robbed, they've been beaten. There's a huge emotional strain and a weight that they carry on their shoulders, partly because they've left everyone that they've known and loved their entire lives to get here.
Ellos lo único que desean es una vida digna, un trabajo y la posibilidad de sostener a sus familias de una manera digna, de tener alimento, estudio, casa, lo mínimo que sea necesario, como también desearían no tener que migrar, no sentirse obligados a migrar por la violencia, por el hambre, por el desastre, por la pobreza y por la corrupción.
The only thing that people are asking for is dignity and the opportunity for the basics in life, a house, an education, a chance, sustainable access to food. They ask that they don't have to be uprooted because of violence and have to flee situations of violence.
Hemos tenido casos que realmente nos han destrozado internamente porque implican para nosotros el resumen de toda la violencia. Y uno de esos ha sido el caso de una joven mujer que pasó en el mes de noviembre. Tenía 17 años, venía sola, no acompañada, salió de Honduras por violencia intrafamiliar.
One of the cases that really tore us up inside was the case of a young Honduran woman. She was 18 and she had to leave for reasons of domestic violence.
En el camino fue nuevamente violentada sexualmente. Su único deseo era poder llegar hasta la ciudad de Saltillo, en México, porque ahí estaba su mamá.
She was assaulted again violently in her journey from Honduras to the place she was traveling to in Mexico.
Cuando pasó por el albergue, tratamos de explicarle las condiciones del camino, las dificultades, de brindarle ayuda psicológica por lo que había sufrido en el camino, pero ella, su ansia era irse y no nos contó todos los detalles de cómo estaba su mamá en Saltillo.
When she arrived, we tried to tell her the dangers of going on and some of the and tried to provide her with some kind of psychological support. It turns out she didn't tell us everything about what was happening with her mother.
Esa noche trató de subirse al tren y cometió algún error. El caso es que cayó del tren en el momento que el tren arrancaba y quedó amputada de las dos piernas, en uno hasta la cadera y en otra hasta la rodilla.
That night she tried to get on the train. She got it on just as it jerked forward and she fell off, and both of her legs were lost in that. They had to be amputated up to the hip.
Esa joven tuvo que ser trasladada a un hospital. Supimos que pudo entrar en contacto con su mamá y después que hemos seguido la historia, sabemos que su mamá hubiera podido ayudarla a llegar hasta su lugar sin necesidad de subirse al tren, porque la mamá ya tenía su refugio y ya estaba integrada en Saltillo. La joven no lo sabía y se subió al tren y no tuvimos la posibilidad de ayudarla para que pudiera llegar sin riesgos hasta cerca de su mamá.
We felt terrible that she had taken this risk because we learned later that her mother had actually become established in Mexico and would have been able to take her in, and that she didn't have to risk jumping on the train and all that subsequently happened.
Y como esos casos que son terribles porque nos dejan en una impotencia muy grande para ayudar a las personas, pues como esos hay muchos otros que han sufrido secuestros express, que han sufrido caídas del tren, que van en busca de personas que se perdieron hace mucho tiempo, pero que su único sueño es tratar de alcanzar la frontera y cruzar para tener una vida digna.
It leaves us sometimes with a feeling of impotence that there are so many cases of people who have been kidnapped or people who have been involved in these schemes involving ATM machines or have fallen from a bus or off the train. And we know that all they're looking for is a dignified life. This is the only thing that is driving them.
Y ciertamente nosotros somos testigos de cómo en este camino ahorita con la pandemia, además, se ha acentuado el problema de que algunos los ven a ellos como amenazas. Son los portadores del virus, son las personas que pueden contaminarlos, o los ven con el miedo de que van a llegar a quitar el trabajo de aquellos que ahorita están perdiendo su trabajo por la pandemia. Entonces es una situación muy complicada en este momento.
We're in a very critical period because many people look at the ones who are arriving as possible carriers of COVID who might infect them. And they see them as people who might be taking the jobs, the few jobs that are left because of the scaling down of so many workplaces with COVID. So they're seen as sort of a double threat, and this has added a layer of complication to their journey.
Por esta razón, en el albergue, además de la ayuda humanitaria, de la defensa de sus derechos humanos, de poder sostenerlos en sus denuncias, queremos también trabajar por una sensibilización de las comunidades y del pueblo para que sea el pueblo quien los sostenga y se solidarice como una sola comunidad.
So in addition to helping the migrants in our shelters with in multiple ways, we've also begun to sensitize the communities around us so that they understand that these are not, these persons don't pose a threat, and that we need to be actually in solidarity with one another.
Por eso tratamos de vivir lo que el Papa nos ha dicho con esos 4 verbos que nos ha invitado a vivir respecto a las personas migrantes. Acogerlos, ayudarles a sentirse personas humanas importantes para todos. Protegerlos en la medida que es posible en la defensa de sus derechos humanos y de su dignidad, promoverlos en cuanto que puedan encontrar medios y maneras de vivir y de integrarse en las comunidades y en las diferentes culturas, integrarlos de una manera que sea digna, en el respeto también de sus culturas y de su diferencia, sin tratar simplemente de asimilarlos o de desaparecerlos. Me parece que por ahí tenemos todo un combate y un trabajo que hacer que no es sencillo, pero en el que todos podemos colaborar.
We think that we should heed the words of the Holy Father, especially in heeding his words about integrating these people, not just assimilating them in, but making them real brothers and sisters to us.
Agradezco la oportunidad de compartir con ustedes estas experiencias y de estar aquí con ustedes, y agradezco también el que hay una sensibilidad y un corazón abierto a esta realidad de tantos hermanos y tantos pueblos de Centroamérica, de Sudamérica y también de nuestro mismo país, México, en la que necesitamos unos a otros ayudarnos a intercambiar las riquezas que todos tenemos. Gracias.
My deepest thanks to all of you, and I hope that you will open your hearts in hearing this and see us all as brothers and sisters here in Latin America, and especially here in Mexico. Thank you.
No sé, Cecilia, si tú quieres agregar algo más.
Solo quería decirles que tenemos
sí.
un poco de tiempo más para que no. We have more time. We can actually end like 15 minutes. We have extra 15 minutes in case you want to share more.
Well, probably the only thing that I want to add is that there are many things that you all can do from wherever you are. What Sister Dolores was sharing is heartbreaking. And I think being conscious that these people that are in desperate need to go away from their communities to find other places to seek for an opportunity for a dignified life, it's something that should be a concern for all the humanity, as Pope Francis said in the Fratelli Tutti encyclica. So I want to invite you to start changing the language about how we address migrants, trying to avoid xenophobia. Open your hearts to listen to the stories of the people that are arriving to our communities and our cities, in order to learn from them, in order to open our hearts to build a better world that integrates people, that allows them to be part of our communities, that allows them to share their religions, their beliefs, their traditions, their knowledge. not seeing them as a humanitarian assistant concern only, but as part of the community and the guys that will add more value to what we already do in the places that we live. So I only want to stress that because it's very important. Only changing the way we talk about migrants, it's helping a lot. So to share that invitation and to invite you all to change the way we see migration in our communities.
Thank you, Cecilia. So at this point, we do have a couple of questions. And one of them is, how would you see a more perfect immigration policy? And I'm thinking it would be one that is compassionate, right? But how do you define a perfect immigration policy that benefits our immigrant brothers and sisters?
Dolores, ¿quieres contestar tú?
No, si quieres empieza y yo le sigo después.
Well, I think this is a regional problem. So the solution should be a regional solution. What I want to say is that it's not only providing money for humanitarian assistance to our countries, it's allowing them to grow, allowing development. And that starts with changing some of the international policies that have created militarization of our countries, that are increasing the violence in our communities, that are impeding people to really succeed in finding ways to survive in their own communities of origin. So we really need to ask our governments to address these problems as a regional problem, where all the countries are involved, but it's also international responsibility from all the countries. So it's not building walls, it's not avoiding the problems. Is really thinking that there is a bunch of people struggling to survive, that need to have an opportunity to make their lives and to educate their kids and to find ways to live with enough food and enough education and medical assistance. So it's only basic things that they need and they don't have. And we really need to ask our politicians to address these issues as a region and collaborate between governments to actually improve agreements, promote development.
Sí, me parece que, como dice Cecilia, hay un trabajo a hacer cada quien en nuestros países, pero que tiene que tener siempre una dimensión local y una dimensión internacional. Las redes que creamos en esto y que vamos fortaleciendo para que localmente haya una red fuerte que luche por sus derechos y que encuentre maneras de vivir, pero que sea sostenida internacionalmente por quienes estamos viendo también la necesidad de esos mismos derechos y que incidimos en nuestros gobiernos para el respeto, para la ayuda eficaz de esos derechos.
She agrees with Cecilia that there should be regional and international cooperation, but she says that we really should emphasize local networks and the strength of local communities and networks, and that there should be advocacy with our governments around the respect for the basic rights of migrants.
And if I can just add, I think that was beautiful. I think just to add to the question, who says that people may say that they minimize the severities that these countries are going through because they're not directly affected by it, particularly in North and South America and Central. There is no, you're not affected by it. You're either directly benefiting from migration or immigration, or you're directly being negatively impacted. So I don't believe that if folks are minimizing it, it's because they choose to, but not because they're not benefiting from these systems. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. And then another question is, how can we in the U.S. support the work of La Hermana Dolores? What can we do? ¿Qué podemos hacer?
Bueno, primero que nada, la apertura del corazón a esta situación, a las personas, eso creo que es fundamental. Y creo que en la medida de que en los países podamos ir creando una forma de conciencia, de hospitalidad y de apertura para respetar la migración y el derecho a no migrar, es una manera también de lograr que nuestros responsables respeten los países y ayuden a una construcción de esta dignidad. Las ayudas económicas son importantes y nos ayudan, ciertamente nos ayudan, pero no es eso lo más importante. Lo importante es todo el cambio de una mentalidad y de una manera de actuar.
A lot of this is about a change in mentality and a mindset. Sister says that the most important thing is to open your hearts, and that we need to create a consciousness or a mentality around hospitality and the openness to the idea of migration and to the migrant themselves. But fundamentally, it's a mindset change that we need to experience.
And then the other question is, what can we say to people that minimize the severities of what our brothers and sisters are facing in other countries, who are directly being affected? And people here may not have any idea of what they're suffering, and so they tend to minimize the severity of the problem.
I do apologize. I answered that question earlier.
Oh, thank you.
So I apologize for that.
No, that's good. Thanks, Laura. Laura, do you mind answering it again live, if that's okay?
Of course, yes. And because the question was around the severity, right? Or folks feeling that they are not directly affected, right, by migration or race. And I would say that's not true. Everybody is either actively benefiting from race and migration, right, or actively, right, being impacted in a negative way by it. And so it's to this question, I think it is about challenging, right, because the question was, how do we impact folks in their sheltered way of thinking? It's challenging that, right, and letting them know, no, you're actually not affected by it. You are benefiting from it. If you're not, I benefit, right, from as being someone with papers, right? Because I know that I have a benefit. And so I actively challenge and stand up for folks who are undocumented because of that. And so I think we all need to check our own privilege when we're having these conversations and see how do we support, right, folks who are undocumented, because nobody came here by choice. Nobody left their tierras because they wanted to, right? Nobody came here because they wanted to bother us. That's not how that works. Yeah, so I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Laura. Hermana, usted estaba platicando, you were sharing before we got on live about the number of people that showed up at your shelter this morning. Could you just share with us what you saw this morning?
Compartir simplemente lo de hoy en la mañana. Bueno, pues hoy fue un día de espera, de atención. Recibimos una llamada telefónica de una ciudad que está antes de nosotros diciendo que en el tren venían 400 personas. Estuvimos esperando, preparando comida, preparando todo lo necesario para atender a 400 personas. Y de repente nos avisaron que venían 500 personas. No sé si va a traducir.
Yeah, she was saying this morning that, they got a phone call saying 400 people were on their way. And so it was all hands on deck, and they started creating 400 meals to receive them. And then they learned, well, really, it's 500 people that are coming.
La llegada es muy impresionante porque vienen a veces parados arriba del tren, porque vienen colgándose del tren. 500 personas en un tren de carga que trae productos de arena, de carbón, de todo. Llegan absolutamente manchados, sucios, acalorados, deshidratados. Así es como llegan a nuestra puerta. Así llegaron a la 1 de la tarde.
He said it's really something to behold. You know, there are people coming in, they're hanging from the train, they're standing on the train. These are trains that are carrying all kinds of products, and they're people are dirty from the travel. And this is what they face when they get off the train. They're 500 people, and they're going to welcome them in whatever condition they're in.
Y pues a la 1 de la tarde nosotros recibimos aquí en la puerta, estaban cerca de 300, 350. Cuando les dijimos que pues la exigencia de la pandemia nos pedía que se lavaran primero las manos, que se higienizaran, que solamente así podíamos atenderlos, pues para muchos es, yo tengo hambre, yo lo único que quiero es comer ahorita, sucio o limpio, comer, es lo único que me interesa.
She said at 1 o'clock, 350 people showed up at the door, and they said, okay, well, with COVID, you've really got to go wash your hands. You got to clean up so that we're at least, you know, a little bit safe. And they said, you know, the thing is, we are just very, very hungry. We would like to eat right now. Can we do that?
Entonces, es una situación difícil porque tenemos y queremos hacernos sentir bienvenidos, recibidos, acogidos. Y al mismo tiempo tenemos que imponerles exigencias para poder atenderlos. Tenemos que pedirles que se laven, que se formen, que esperen, que se sirva la comida en orden. Primero las mujeres, primero los niños. Había 3 niños y había cerca de 8 mujeres.
Mm. So as much as we'd like to just receive them with open arms and be warm in our welcome, there is a little bit of order that has to be imposed. We have to make sure that they wash up, that they line up, that the children get fed first, that the women are second. We had a bunch of children this morning. So it's our situation is difficult, and trying to convey that to you.
Y sin embargo, en este momento yo he estado con ustedes 1 hora más o menos, 1 hora y media, y mientras el equipo, que somos puras mujeres, porque desde que empezó la pandemia no tenemos ningún varón que nos ayude. Somos puras mujeres, yo soy la más vieja, desde luego, pero hay gente joven que me está ayudando. Ellas se han encargado de estar atendiendo para que pasen a bañarse y para que puedan aprovechar después de la comida un momento de descanso.
So this is an effort of many women. She noted there's not a single man that has volunteered to help. So they're just doing all this with women, and they're putting order in the court on it, and making sure that people follow the protocols and that everybody gets attended to.
Entonces, toda esta tarde, ahorita, mientras hablamos, ellos han estado entrando a bañarse, a lavarse, a poder refrescarse un poco, y probablemente hoy en la noche van a tratar nuevamente de tomar el tren y seguir su camino. Después de 12 horas de viaje, van a seguir hoy en la noche probablemente, si es que migración no hace un operativo y los detiene.
Mm. So this whole time we've been talking, people have been lining up, they've been getting washed, they've been getting ready to eat, and she believes that tonight many of them will probably jump on the train again, unless migration does an operation where they round people up or stop people. But as we've been talking, there's been all this sort of drama going on around her.
En este momento justamente se está tratando de preparar una bebida para darles algo caliente y un poco de pan para que puedan llevar en el camino si es que se van esta noche. Y si no, mañana cuando abramos nuevamente el albergue a las 7 de la mañana, a las 7:30, pues los vamos a encontrar nuevamente aquí, enfrente del albergue, esperándonos para atenderlos.
So we're trying to make sure if they do have to leave tonight, they have something hot to bring with them and some bread. And if not, we'll be here in the morning and we'll welcome them for breakfast.
Sister Dolores, Is there any way, anyone that would like to contribute to your mission? What can they do? How will they be able to assist? And also, the other question is, where do you get your funding to provide the food and the clothes, all the bare necessities that migrants need? Where does the assistance come from?
En general, los albergues no tenemos fondos muy firmes. En general, los albergues vivimos de donaciones. Donaciones que en ocasiones son regulares y en ocasiones no son regulares. Justamente las hermanas de San José de Orange, California, apoyan un proyecto que se vive en este albergue y cada año nos ayudan un poco para poder sostener este proyecto que implica alimento, ropa, medicinas, algunos elementos necesarios para el albergue. Los donativos, las ayudas, a veces son difíciles de pasar entre países. Tenemos una serie de requisitos legales para poder hacer llegar ayudas económicas. Creo que en eso Cecilia nos podría ayudar para encontrar caminos para poder lograr esos apoyos. Ciertamente los necesitamos. No hay ningún albergue que tenga un sostenimiento ni del gobierno ni de un fondo definitivo. Vivimos de puros donativos. La ropa usada que nos regalan, la comida que nos regalan, cualquier cosa que nos regalan y que siempre estamos tratando de canalizar para que sea llegada hasta ellos.
So we don't really have a firm, secure source of funding that's regular. We live by donations and the kindness of others. The Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, for example, help out. She said that we can be in touch with Cecilia Suarez from CRS and when talking about other kinds of help. She said there have been some obstacles to getting help to them. And that maybe with Cecilia's help, we can kind of sort this out.
Y ciertamente yo quiero insistir en el apoyo que hemos tenido de las hermanas de San José de Orange ya desde hace algunos años. Tuvimos la visita de algunas de ellas en México y pudimos hablar del proyecto y desde ese momento las hermanas de San José de Orange han sido sumamente solidarias con nosotras, hermanas de San José también de León, para poder sostener este proyecto de poder seguir sirviendo y trabajando en este albergue.
So I just want to underline that the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange have been extremely helpful. They've even come and visited with us. And there are other sisters from, I can't recall what she said, De Leon was what I caught, but who have also been instrumental in their survival and their ability to operate day to day.
Cecilia, I'm wondering if you can post your email address on the chat for anyone that may want to contact you and have any questions as to how they can assist the shelter. That would be helpful. Would that be okay? Okay. This has been a wide eye-opening for all of us. When you think you know, when you hear stories about our brothers and sisters having to flee their homes because they're being pushed because they need to survive and they have to make a choice, it's a very difficult choice. And when they get here, then they're faced with additional racism. They're isolated in communities where they get sick. There are all types of difficulties and conflicts that they face from the quality of air, the neighborhoods they live, and the lack of resources for communities of color. So we can see a definite connection between our international brothers and sisters that are being pushed out of their countries because of climate crisis and then affected by racism for those that are actually make it on the other side of the border. As we know, there are many of our brothers and sisters, Cecilia mentioned, 77,000 people on our border waiting to have some type of assistance. Thank you so much for your sharing, Cecilia, Laura. Hermana Dolores, and thank you so much, Doug, for all your help in helping us put this panel together. And the translation was it was all very helpful. You are putting us in a perspective and a situation where we know, now we have the responsibility to do something about it. With knowledge comes accountability, right? So, muchas gracias, hermana. Yo sé que tiene sus personas afuera esperándola para que vayan y le agradecemos haber tomado el tiempo. We know you have people outside waiting for you to go out there, and we appreciate the time you've taken to be with us today to share your powerful testimony. We are grateful for your time, and thank you for the tremendous work you all do to address justice. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our participants. And you all have a wonderful day.
You too.